Hello, my name's Faye and this is FayesParallelStories, and I thought I'd give you a wrap up of the 15 books I read in December, which is more than I read any other month of the year. I think I was motivated by trumping that Goodreads goal in the end. So 15 books. I'm going to skim over books that I read for the smutathon in December. I think that was 6 books, something like that. But I've wrapped those up before, so you can head that way. 50 books is way too many anyway, so I'll just start from the top. The very first book I read was Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie, which I'd never read before. The original story, I'd watched the Disney movie, and just generally this is part of our pop culture, I guess. But I read it and didn't love it. I think I ended up rating it quite highly though. I think I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars just because it's crafted in a really nice way. The storytelling is really clever, how sort of magic is interwoven with the everyday life of these children and their family home. But yeah, of course, we all know the story of Peter Pan and Wendy and Tinkerbell. The thing that just really riled me up was how awful the depiction of little boys and little girls is, and I realised that I have to keep in mind the time that it was written, but I'm still reading it from a current stance point, and it is still being told to kids that are growing up today, and I just thought all the girls were really annoying and all the boys were really cool, which is sad. Next, I read Not Just for Christmas by Natalie, which I believe was also published under the alternative title Moths and Mistletoe. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. It delivers exactly what you expect. It's the story about Charlie, who everything goes to shits back at home in London. So she goes to her cousin's place over the holidays, who runs a doggy daycare, and there's also a brooding vet. The very artificial drama is minuscule and ridiculous, but there are great dogs in the story, and the love story I didn't really care for that much, but it delivers what is on the tin. If you feel like a sort of feel-good book with lots of dogs in it, which I regularly need, then this is a good one. Obviously now with Christmas being gone, it's not exactly what you would pick up in January, but I didn't even think it was that important that it was set at Christmas time at all. The third book I read was the 1978 published The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald. I've since then returned it to my mum's. It was her copy, and this was absolutely not what I had expected. I think I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I was expecting a feel-good story about Florence, who goes to a small town to open up a bookshop, and the trials and tribulations she faces in making this a success. But that's not what you get. You get a very short, very depressing book, and that's not what I was expecting. I also didn't actually love the characters. I found them sort of caricaturesque almost, and in the end felt like the story was very stilted. I thought either it could have been fleshed out more, turned into a longer novel, or celebrated like the short format more in a short story. But this way I found it quite undecided with its, I don't actually remember how many pages it is, 150, something like that maybe, and I didn't love it, unfortunately. The only book I have to show you in physical format is A List of Cages by Robin Rowe. I read this because I think there was a readathon going on in December which had this as their group read. I didn't actually join in, but I still thought the book sounded good. This is about Adam and Julian. Julian is a few years younger than Adam, and their lives meet again after having lived together when Julian was the foster kid in Adam's family, but he moved out to live with his uncle, and their paths cross again in high school. This is, on the surface, if you were to describe it sort of in simple terms, a contemporary, hard-hitting YA story, which a lot of those exist, but I did actually find this extremely impactful. Yes, there are a few scenes in this that are a bit just horrible to get the feels, and sometimes I find that a bit like lazy storytelling, but I still think the strength of this book is that it does make you emote with the characters, And the whole topic of like the worth of foster families, I thought was really beautifully highlighted in this story. Although I don't think this would be the perfect pick for someone who is more critical of stories that center around like horrible things happening to children, then, you know, don't bother. But I thought this was a very nice is an inadequate word, powerful story. Then after reading all the smut for Smutathon, I can't remember whether I touched on that in my wrap up. I did then go to read The Deal by Elle Kennedy, I believe, which I really, really enjoyed. Sort of college setting of a girl and a boy going in, woman and a man. When do you start being a woman and a man? Going into a sort of fake relationship to put on the radar of the football star that she actually fancies, and then they inevitably develop feelings for each other. I thought that was really, really sweet. And still had some like serious content. But then I decided to focus on some of the books that I wanted to give back to my mum's when I was visiting her over the holidays. I read Vinegar Girl by Anne Tyler, which is a retelling of The Taming of the Shrew. And I thought this was actually a really delightful story. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, which suggests that I wasn't blown away. And I wasn't, but it was a really nice read. You have the story of The Taming of the Shrew that you already know. I was super reminded of the, is it 90s, early 2000s, 90s movie of 10 Things I Hate About You movie. So many flashbacks. I love that when I was a teenager. And we have, of course, the main character, the shrew, who's sort of apparently unlovable and stuck in a bit of a dead-end job as a not fully trained kindergarten teacher, and she enters an arranged marriage essentially to ensure that her dad's lab assistant can remain living in America. The characters are really cool. I especially liked her sister, who this I also remembered from that teen movie in the 90s, is painted as this sort of ditzy dumb girl when actually it's just a front and what she does to get her own way. I thought she was a cool character. But still, I don't feel like Anne Tyler really turned this into a new story that demanded to be told. I often think that is difficult with retellings of source material you're quite familiar with. Next, I read Unorthodox by Deborah Feldman, which has the subtitle of something like My Scandalous Rejection of My Hasidic Roots, I think. And this is her memoir, although still very young, about how she left her Orthodox Jewish community in Williamsburg in New York, and how it was growing up in this sect. Some people see it as a sect. I guess that's a question of definition. I thought the book got more and more interesting as she got older in the book, and that is also my disappointment with the book, I guess. I did give it 3 out of 5 stars, suggesting that I thought it is a worthwhile read, but she gets so bogged up in the beginning in all the detail, all the customs, all the traditions in her family and in the faith that they practice, which I just didn't find that interesting. Some others might. And then when we actually get to the switch in her sort of own independent thought and how she turns away from that faith, that was quite sort of slapdash quick, just sort of brushed over. She has since then written a follow-up memoir about how her life then carried on, which I have yet to read. I'm interested, although I'm skeptical because I have read some comments by people on this second novel where they say that she doesn't actually go into detail on how she struggles then to still sort of maintain her Jewish faith whilst not wanting to practice the Satmar way of life. Apparently that is actually not what you get. So I feel a bit unsure how to sort of store this in my mind. There were a lot of things in this book in Unorthodox that I didn't know, and I thought it was worthwhile that she read the book that she wrote the book and I read it, but I didn't find it as enthralling, I guess, as I was expecting it to be. I also gave 3 out of 5 stars to An Available Man by Hilma Wolitzer, about a newly widowed 62-year-old science teacher at a high school, which is a really sweet story, really, about how he re-enters the dating scene, and also quite an interesting commentary on how much easier men at that age find dating and how much less men are available to the women who are seeking a partner. Edward at least is really surprised by all the attention that he gets and isn't quite sure how to deal with it. It also just talks about his grief, and I liked how realistic it was. It wasn't just a sort of 2-month portrait of his time and how he quickly gets over his wife, but it does span over a few years, and I could get on board with it. I thought that was believable. And in the end, it was just a nice story. I thought the characters were quite complex, and you could tell that Hilma Wolitzer, albeit new to me as an author, has actually written quite a lot already. Her characters had flaws and quirks, and just were really nicely rounded people that I could also believe existed. And then the very last book of my year was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, which I listened to on audiobook and thought was excellent, which I was really, really pleased about, because I've previously only read Ugly Love, I believe, by Colleen Hoover, and thought that was just a sort of really stereotypical, difficult man is so sexy, and the girl sort of turns him around because she's so pure. And that's just so boring. But It Ends With Us is so much more than that. It tackles quite difficult topics, but it doesn't do that in a neat way and refrains from wrapping a bow around it. And I thought that was really quite surprising. And kudos to the author, who apparently put in quite a lot more sort of personal experience into this novel than with many of her previous works. I will not say more than that because I didn't know more than that about the story, and I believe that is also how you should go into reading it. I thought it was great. I also actually liked the audiobook, which I don't always tend to do. Although it was interesting reading a book that does have like more or less graphic sex scenes in it, and listening to it, it seemed a bit more intimate somehow than having the distance whilst reading something on the page. But yeah, those were all the books I read. I've skimmed over the books for smutathon. Please go ahead, check that out if you like, Colleen Hoover and The Deal, and I read loads more along those veins. But I thought I'd also give the other books a bit of time and focus to talk about them. I'm really happy I did end up reading that much in 2018, but now bring on 2019. I'm looking forward to it. Until then, bye bye guys.